I think it is hardly necessary to say that we are living in a time of world crisis, when all values are breaking down and new ones are very urgently being brought to the consciousness of the people in general. And definitely, I think that this is a particularly sensitive and significant place to discuss the possibilities ahead for mankind, for during the last 10 years, much has happened here, which has spread through the whole world and has now initiated here new developments of one kind or another. Now, when a culture or a society is facing a crisis of transformation because it has reached a point in its total development when such a crisis is possible, it becomes also possible for an ever larger number of individuals to enter upon the path of self-transformation. And it is this possibility that we want to discuss here tonight. Now, the possibility is not merely the possibility of becoming a bigger and better man, woman, a freer woman, but to become really, what I say, more than man, to reach a transhuman state of evolution which is ahead of us and which we can reach if we are willing to do what is necessary to do it. Now, most people today, even the people who are intent on revolution, psychological or otherwise, I'm afraid do not understand fully the possibility. And astrology can help us. It can help to clarify, to make clearer, to make more conscious what this possibility of transformation implies for a particular person, you and I. And it can help us to show the way how to go about actualizing that possibility. Now, the first thing that you have to try to realize, because we want to be clear and methodical about it, is to understand what is to be transformed. And so we have to start from the beginning. And the beginning is birth. Birth, as I have often said, is emergence into an open environment. When the embryo is in the womb, it is not in an open environment. And one of the essential characteristics of an open environment is that you can breathe, that you can exchange air. Air, as far as we know, at least in this planet of ours, air is the soul of the biospheric environment. It is that which establishes and symbolizes the unity of all lives. And that is something that people who are interested in astrology should really try to understand. That is the real meaning of the air element. It is that which makes it possible to all human beings to experience their unity, because it links us all. We all breathe the same air. The air that we breathe here, in 2 or 3 months, will have turned around the whole globe. And it has been breathed before by millions of other human beings. And so that air goes into the most intimate region of our being. People that we might hesitate to touch or make love with or anything, contact, whatever you want to speak of, we are at one with them through the air that we breathe. But an open biosphere, an open environment, means challenges, it means conflicts, it means problems of survival, and the way human beings and most lives have worked out the solution of the problem is to create societies. groups. Now, a society at the human level develops a culture, and that culture is like the psychomental matrix which is needed for the development of a form consciousness, that is a mind. Mind is simply a form of consciousness. To develop mind, to develop a sense of individuality in man, we have to have a language. We have to use symbols. We are at first, of course, physiologically born of parents. We are born in a family of some sort. We are born in a community, in a group, culture, nation. Those groups have certain rituals, have developed certain kind of patterns of living, and first of all, a language. And the language is extremely important factor, because the way you talk, that is the way you think. And your consciousness as an individual is first of all determined by the collective nature of the language which you speak, which therefore means the dependence on your culture. Now, there are two alternatives which present themselves, of course, to a human being who is born in a family, in a culture, a society, nation, whatnot. Either you can fulfill the symbols of that collective culture, either you can reach a point of state of self-fulfillment, personal fulfillment, integration, in terms of those symbols, in terms of the culture, in terms of that language that you are speaking. Or you can emerge out of this culture just as a child emerged out of the womb of the mother. There is therefore a second emergence into real individual living and consciousness, which brings you in touch with a still more open universe. Now you have the first level universe, which is the biological universe, the biosphere, in which you partake of the life and the instincts and the drives of all animals and plants to some extent. Then you have the social, cultural level of activities and consciousness, in which you partake of the nature and the character of your society, your culture. You find yourself related closely to the people of that culture and share your experience in terms of that language and that culture and so on. Then there is a higher still, and by higher I mean more inclusive, more encompassing kind of level, and it is what you might call the cosmic level. Now what do I mean by cosmic? I have used those terms, and the terms are used all around, sometimes with very little understanding of what you are really speaking about. There you have to go for a second into a more metaphysical approach and deal with what I call the principle of holism, or in a better sense still, holarchy. Holos means whole, archy, the principle of the whole, the principle that every whole includes parts which are themselves wholes, which also includes lesser parts, and so on. So that every entity, every whole, every existent is at the same time part of a greater whole, and also is a whole which includes many lesser parts. Now this is the essential foundation on which any metaphysical or cyclic, holistic type rests. And if you don't understand that, then of course, to my mind, you don't understand anything from a realistic point of view. You can understand it in an emotional, feeling point of view, subjective point of view, but not in what I call a realistic point of view. Now, man, of course, is part of the planet Earth, part of the biosphere. He is also part of the solar system, and is also part of the galaxy within which that solar system operates as one single cell within a large organism. Now, there are different kinds of spaces. There is the space of the biosphere, which deals with solid objects and the relationship between solid objects. There are the space of the solar system, which deals more with various kinds of energies, electrical, magnetic energies, and so on. And there is also what we may begin to understand as the galactic space. Now, the crisis of repolarization of energy or refocusing of consciousness, which means the refocusing of your sense of identity, depends on moving from one kind of space to another, from moving from a lesser whole to a greater whole, of which we are also a part. The question there, if you are thinking of the sense of identity, and if you ask that famous question, who am I think it is very important, and it is an important fact which is often not understood by esoteric or mystic people and so on, is that you can never answer the question, who am I, until you find an answer to the question, where do I belong? That is, to what or to whom am I related in my deepest central self and consciousness? This is the realistic, objective approach. To whom, what am I related in my deeper self of consciousness? Because that is going to tell you what this self is. If you are related basically to your family and to your culture, then the self that you speak of as I has all the characteristics of a socio-cultural entity. If you are related to a larger pattern of race or nation, you may develop a somewhat larger consciousness. You can still increase your consciousness if you are able to feel yourself related to mankind as a whole and the whole planet also, of which mankind is merely an organ, as it were, just like the brain is an organ of the total human organism. And of course, you can also feel related to the universe as a whole. Or if you are of a religious nature and you want to subjectivize and personify your relation to the universe, you are related to God. Now, relationship is always a two-way affair. You desire relationship, you meet people to whom you relate, and by meeting them, you also polarize a certain kind of response. There are two kinds of basic type of relationship. There is the horizontal relationship, from human being to human being, from people in the biosphere to another person or entity in the biosphere, horizontal relationship. You all belong to that same level of consciousness, to that same level of wholeness. And then there are vertical relationships, so-called, in which the lesser whole is related to the greater whole of which it is a part. And it is those kind of vertical relationships which you can call transpersonal relationship. Now, the word transpersonal has been used in two ways. I probably was the first one to use it in a particular way, so way back in 1930, which I began to use it. And the way I used it was to give to the term the meaning of trans, which means through, essentially. Transatlantic is a boats that come across the Atlantic. Transverse, transcendental, all that is a thing that goes through space. There is also a way of using trans, which means beyond. Transalpine, for instance, is that which is beyond the Alps. And it is the second kind of meaning, trans meaning beyond, which has become popularized recently by the transpersonal school of psychology, which essentially is an attempt to start from the human being and to see how that human being moved beyond its limitation into a higher, more inclusive sphere. But also, transpersonal may mean that type of activity in which the entity, which is transpersonal, become an agent through which, or through whom, higher forces, forces that belong to the sphere of the greater whole of which he is a part, of which he is able to recognize himself a part, and to which he is able to respond. The energies of that greater whole operate through him, focus themselves through him, and affect all the people in the level in which he is operating. Now, an operation, an activity through something is something which operates through the space which separates us all in a concrete, visible, or tactile manifestation of the difference in vibratory response between us and the other person or the other entity that you are separated from. So that actually, when you speak of distance, you are really speaking of a psychological distance, or psychic distance, or vibratory difference, you see. Now, for instance, when I speak of the galactic space, I am in galactic space now. You all are. Every atom of our being is in galactic space, as well as in solar system space, as well as in biospheric space. But we do not respond to that biospheric, to that galactic space. And if you, therefore, if you read a book on the astronomy, you will be told, for instance, that we are millions of light years, which is a tremendous distance, from the galaxy center. Now, all what that means is that the distance in consciousness, the distance in the possibility to actualize what is potential in your existence, that distance is very great. And we interpret it as physical distance, but actually it is a psychological, psychic, or vibratory difference, you see. We live in God, but we don't experience God. We don't know the universe as a universe, though we are in it. But you see, we are not able to let ourselves penetrated with it consciously, and we do not consciously react to the action of that universe. So that the thing to realize is that from that greater whole of which we are a part, there is a constant action, just as well as there is a possibility of an action from us to reach towards the universe or towards God. There is also an action which moves from the higher to the lower. And that action, actually, is simply one which offers us the opportunity to the extent to which we can respond to it, the opportunity to meet consciously that higher whole, the consciousness of that higher being. Now, from the point of view of transpersonal, which means going beyond the limitation of the personal, then you have the path of the mystic, which is the path of progressive refinement, transformation, transfiguration, and losing yourself, in a sense, into the greater whole, into God, into nirvana, or whatever you want to call it. But there is also an other part, which in my book, Occult Preparation for a New Age, which came out very recently, 2-3 months ago. And there is a chapter where I explain very clearly, I hope, the difference between the two ways. And I show that transpersonal, that going through, that focusing of the greater whole power, consciousness, into the and through the little hole that we call our personality, our being, our consciousness, our mind, that focusing take the place especially in the category of human being that we call, at the highest sense, the avatars, in a lesser sense, the great creative geniuses, mankind, and also the great heroes who are at the source of all great cultures and are more or less worshipped or glorified afterwards as the founder of that particular culture. You see. Now, a person who lives in that transpersonal way, that way of focusing the highest into the biosphere, into our community, into our society, and therefore to transform that society, is a way which demands a complete surrender, as it were, of the lesser to the greater. But a surrender which at the same time doesn't mean that you are giving up the instrumentality through which that refocusing, that focusing activity of the higher into the lower can operate. So that you cannot give up your mind, you cannot give up, in a certain sense, your ego, in the larger sense of the term ego. Because if you did, then there would be nothing through which that greater self, God or the universe or the galaxy, could operate through you. So that it is like if you have a lens which takes diffuse sunlight and bring that diffuse sunlight into a sharp focus where great heat is generated, and where therefore you can burn a match or a piece of paper and so on. Well, our mind, our consciousness, our form consciousness should be like that lens, so perfectly formed, so transparent, so translucent, that through it, you see, the energy of the creative forces of the universe can operate. Now, from the point of view of humanistic astrology and humanistic psychology, the birth chart, for instance, is like a mandala of which you, as a self, is the center. But you have to realize that there are two kinds of mandala, basically. There is a mandala which has a closed center, at the center of which there is a physical entity, which has mass, volume, weight. But there are also mandalas which have an open center, at the center of which there is nothing. Shunya, emptiness, void. I don't know if you are familiar with the fact that in China, in old China, the Mandarin, the scholars and so on, each one, according to their class, had a disc of jade which represented their function and their level of operation in the hierarchy of the Chinese state. And those discs of jade had an empty center, hollow center, flat disc, you know, with a center, hollow with a center, like a donut kind of thing. And the larger the whole, the higher was the level of the scholar. Now, the point is there, you see, that if you can develop within yourself this kind of a empty center, but at the same time it's an emptiness which is translucent to the light and which operates as an absolutely clear lens which seems empty and yet is not empty. It's an emptiness which has form, if you understand what I mean. It is an emptiness through which everything that passes, light, energy, power, take form. And therefore, the rays that pass through it, when they reach what they are supposed to reach and to transform, transmute, fecundate, or whatnot, it does so not in a just plain energy, but as formed energy, a tone which has in itself the capacity to set in vibration material into a definite geometrical pattern. Now, there is, of course, a great deal of danger in that kind of approach, that transpersonal approach, because it is very easy sometimes to fool oneself and to think that you are very open, and you are open to the highest, and God, and light, and whatnot. And actually what comes through you maybe is poop. It is very difficult sometimes to differentiate yourself between being a medium and being a genius. And therefore, you can never be too careful as to what it is that you allow to pass through, and what kind of openness is your openness, whether it is a formed openness or a chaotic openness, an openness which is creative of meaning and not creating of confusion. And of course, it is very easy when you go on the path of transformation, the path of basic metamorphosis, of occult discipleship, let us say, to be open to an inrush of forces which perhaps you think are wonderful things and may turn out to be the stirred up chaos of your personal unconscious. It is very easy to pass through crises of various kinds when you are in the path of so-called discipleship to a master of wisdom or to a great guru and so on. And you are tested constantly, and you have to be very careful about it. But the point is that that possibility is there. Now, the highest purpose of astrology, as I see it, is to provide the individual human being with a knowledge of how best and when to act, so that the closed center of his ego or her ego may open up to the power of the inherent destiny, which in India is called Dharma, the truth of being that which you are born for. Now, the typical type of humanistic astrology is essentially based on the idea of revealing what the person is and how best it can fulfill what he is. But the transpersonal approach to astrology, which I am more personally concerned with, particularly in the last 2-3 years, and which you will find developed more in a book coming out in the fall by Dutton called The Sun is Also a Star, and which deals with the galactic approach to astrology. But transpersonal approach is how to meet the call for greater being, how to be able to shift gear, to repolarize, to reorient, to transmute your consciousness. But that can only happen significantly and constructively if you have completely and fully accepted the possibility of it, and also willingly accepted the means whereby it can operate. And when you have accepted that possibility, then crisis or transformation begin to happen. And the issue involved in a crisis is always an individual, personal issue. Because the question is, are you ready? Are you willing? Your obstacles to that readiness and that willingness are always unique, because they are part of your unique background, environment, time of birth, and genetic background, and so on. So the obstacles are unique, and the solution of your problems are also unique, also individual. So it is very important that you should understand fully your past and to fully accept it. Dharma, in a Hindu sense, can only be performed through and beyond the fulfillment of karma. You are faced at birth with a tremendous amount of unfinished business. Call it, if you want, the karma of a past incarnation. If you want to personalize things, call it the karma of the race, call it the karma of the universe, call it whatever you want. The fact is that you are born at a certain point because there is a need for somebody to be born at a certain point. Somebody who can readjust the things that have been put out of gear somewhere, somehow, by you or somebody or everybody or whatever it is. But there is a need, and therefore you have a purpose in life. That purpose is to fill that need. But in doing that, you have to be able to meet that past, to meet the conditions that are involved in that need. And therefore you have to be able to reach and fulfill your karma. Now, everything in the chart can be used for transformation. It can be used for the transformation of yourself. It can be used for the transformation of your capacity for relationship, the transformation of the quality of your relationship, which involve other people. And of course, at the limit, it can be used to transform the culture from which you have emerged or are emerging, and which gave you the very tools which you need for that individualization and that so-called liberation. And as I say, the first tool that the society has given you and that you must respect and understand is your language. Now, what is needed, therefore, on that path of transformation is not personal happiness as such. It is not even exactly the fulfillment of your nature in a biospheric, biological sense. Because it may be that you are born for a purpose which involves frustration as a necessity for fulfilling your dharma. All what is essential on that path is that you reach the capacity to effectively focus power so that you can act when action is needed and the way action is needed. An old friend of mine, a great Hindu teacher, once said that the spiritual life is very simple. You think only the necessary thing, you feel only the necessary thing, and you do only the necessary act. Very simple, but very difficult. Now, the sins of omission are very often far more important than the sins of commission. It is not so much what you have done which troubles you, but it's what you have failed to do. What you didn't do at a time when it was necessary for you to do it. You haven't done it because you were afraid, because you clung to comfortable, familiar, nice, happy, and so on. In the occult idea about the origin of evil in our planet, it is said that the reason why in Atlantis problem developed between the so-called white and black magician and so on was that previously to that, spiritual entities which had reached the point in their cosmic karma to incarnate into the very primitive men who were more like animals than anything else. When they look at those forms, biological forms, said, oh my God, in that, going down in that? And they said, we are spiritual, we can choose. And they refused to incarnate. And as a result, all sorts of terrible things happened. Those forms began to mate with animals, and all sorts of monsters were created. And finally, when they came again and looked at the situation, they realized that if they did really this time didn't incarnate, the thing would blow up, and it would be a horrible mess. And so they incarnated in entities, in bodies which were already, many of them, defiled and perverted. And so that was the beginning of evil on our planet. Not what they did do, but what they refused to do, because they were afraid, because they didn't like it, because they didn't think it would bring them happiness, and so on. And so you see, the life of the spiritual way, of the transpersonal way, the way of transformation, is a difficult way, and it is, as Castaneda would say in the Don Juan, the way of a warrior. And of course, if you read the Bhagavad Gita, you will also find that the symbol of man, Arjuna, is also a warrior. And when he feels suddenly very despondent because he sees that he has family people in both his camp and the opposite camp and refuse to work and go to war and fight. And Krishna, his charioteer, said, look, this is your destiny. You are a warrior. Fulfill your dharma. I have already killed those people. Don't worry about it. Just do what you have to do and leave the consequence of your action on me alone, me the Supreme, the Divine Being. Everything has to be a focused, effective act of transformation if it is valuable. And so it is essential for the spiritual life to have a clear mind, to have a sharp will, and to have a purposeful, meaningful capacity to focus your energy at the proper time, at the proper place, for the proper results. Now, this is the kind of things, you see, that transpersonal astrology can help to some extent, because it helps you to understand the meaning of crisis in your life and the timing of those crises, which is highly important. But if this transpersonal astrology is to be valid and not dangerous or premature, the person must have accepted the whole of his or her nature as a transforming situation. Everything that you are born with, everything which involve your life situation, is the thing that you have got to use for a focused, powerful action. It's no use to try to look around for something else. It's no use for the oak tree to try to become an apple tree because he likes its blossom. The dharma of anybody else is full of danger because you are going into a tangent, bypass. You have to fulfill what you are born for. And it is in those crises, then the descent of the power will come and manifest itself. It will induce those crises when you are ready for them. And therefore, when you are dealing with an astrological chart, dealing with that type of activity of transformation, the moment of what I call the moment of interpretation, the moment at which you, if you are a professional astrologer, the moment the patient comes to you or the client is all important for that client and for your interpretation of the chart. Because the first thing that you have to try to understand is the man or the woman ready? What can I say that will be a transforming and constructively transforming statement? Now, I don't know if many of you realize that the most essential function of a guru in the whole Hindu tradition, and that applies also to some extent in the West, though the term guru has very much less meaning in the Western world than it has in India, of course. But the function of the guru, essentially, is to create crisis, is to force you to meet your karma. Your mind of consciousness is always, your ego is very clever in, when you find a crisis, you go around it, hoping that somehow you will escape from facing it. And so we pass our time evading issues. We pass our time trying not to face a crisis. And it is the task, the first task of the guru, to create a situation where you have got to face the crisis, to pit disciple against disciple, so that they will fight it out and show themselves in the worst possible situation, in the worst possible light, so that they will be forced to see what is wrong with them. This is the most important thing which takes place in an ashram. The rest is just clear devotion, which is very relatively unimportant. Now, if you are strong enough, life can do the crisis. If you are ready, willing, and able to face your crisis, then life will do it. And particularly when you are born at a time of collective crisis, which is pregnant with the possibility of radical transformation, then it will be very easy for life to present you with opportunity to have a crisis, you see. But it is no use either to rush into it. It's no use to court crisis, but only to be open when they come. And that is again what astrology can help doing, because particularly when you refer to the position of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, which are the signature, which are the words which in the cosmic language of astrology told to humanity, this is the words that you need now that you have reached a certain point where you can reach some very important crisis and opportunity in your development. And so we have reached through the development of mind, of analytical mind, empirical mind, atomistic mind, we have reached the capacity to create any number of crises. And humanity had reached that point where it was able to produce those crises by itself, to create a society which was constantly in a state of crisis. The meaning of democracy is a type of unstable society which is in a constant state of crisis, and therefore in which individuals have a constant possibility to themselves meet their crisis and therefore to transform themselves. Now this is a very important thing. And of course there the text issue is, what do you do with crisis? Well, most people, and if you are in a doctor and if you are in a mental institute, you know very well that when you have a serious crisis, which they interpret as psychosis or whatnot, the thing that they try to do, calm it down, remove the symptoms, make matter easier, relax, forget. Forget so well that you can go back to the same situation which created your trouble, and this time be sometimes so dumb that you can face meet it in a critical situation. You forget that it is a crisis. This is, of course, the scene of omission, which we're all performing, and our society is wonderfully performing. The thing is that a crisis should be welcomed as an opportunity for growth. That is the humanistic approach. And an opportunity for transformation, which is the transpersonal approach. So that crisis, from a Jungian point of view, will help for a deeper integration of the personality, self-fulfillment in terms of your culture, a higher understanding of your culture, but still in terms of your culture. So you tell the people, if you have had trouble from your religious background, and you have come to a kind of critical neurotic period because of that, solve your problem, sum your neurosis, and go back to your church. You will go back as a transformed person, and perhaps you can help the church transform itself. But go back to it because it's your root, and what you have to do is to fulfill yourself as a person in terms of the society and the culture in which you are born. But from the point of view of the true occultist, the transpersonal way, then a crisis is not something to go back, even if transformed, but is to change gear, to go in neutral, the crisis very often, but keep in control. Don't get passive. The trouble with a psychotic is in a crisis, is in neutral, but somehow the conscious element is no longer there to understand what is happening. So there is a split, and the thing is not integrated in understanding. It doesn't know what the crisis is for. Now, a occult student, a disciple, on the path of discipleship, should know what a crisis is for. And therefore, knowing it, keep in control of the thing, even though being totally aware, let it happen. Now, I could go into great detail, but I see the time is coming close. In my book, what I mentioned too, The Sun is Also a Star, which you will, in a few months, 2 weeks really, almost, I deal with Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and aspects between them, the passage through the houses, and especially through the sign of the zodiac, in terms of a collective pattern of possibility of transformation. That's all what they mean. When you say that you have Uranus or Neptune or Pluto into a sign of the zodiac, it doesn't mean anything for you individually. It means that you are born of a particular generation which is faced with certain opportunity for crisis and to meet this crisis. Now, the point which is individual factor has to do with the houses in which those planets and those aspects take place. The relation to the angles. It is the angles of the chart which represent you as a person, as an individual person. It is through the angles of the chart, by referring to those angles and to the houses, the position of those transforming planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, that you can understand when, how, in terms of what kind of experience you can best have crisis, most significant kind of crisis. Everything which deals with the house deals with a particular type of experience. Astrology tells us there are 12 basic kind of experience, 12 houses. When a planet is in house, it means that it is through that kind of experience that the function represented by the planet can best operate. So So that everything in a chart tells you what is best way for you to do it. Don't try to do anything with your chart. Try to be it. This is your situation. That is what you have to deal with. This is what you have to use. But you have to use it consciously. Astrology, like Jung spoke of Tao as the conscious way. It is the conscious way. It is the way to orient yourself to what you are, to what you are born with, to what you are born as, to the events of your life, to the development of your life. It is how to deal with all that, which is what astrology will tell you. And what you see in a chart is the best way to do everything. If Mars is in the 6th house, the best way is to use your mobilization power, your power of moving forward into action and all that, to use it in terms of 6th house experience. If it means illness, well, that shows that's the way you have to reach the condition of crisis through any illness. And so what? It doesn't matter what the event is. The only thing that matters is what you do with it. Now, it is so important that you must face the existential problem realistically and avoid what is so often pseudo-mystical vagueness. It is really all very simple if you understand that the whole problem is to change frame of reference. You are bound to the type of relationship that you have made to a family, to your name, which nobody wants to change because somehow, oh, I can't change my name, you know, because it's I. Well, it's you as long as you are connected and dependent and relying upon your family and cultural background. But the moment you cease to have that reliance and dependence, then it doesn't matter what kind of name you have. And if you join a convent or a monastery or become a guru, the chela of a guru in India, you are given a new name because you are entering a new type of relationship, a new sphere of relatedness, a new frame of reference which relates you to a greater whole. And so you move to the level of a cultural level, social level, to the kind of heliocosmic space, a solar system space, and essentially galactic space. And you will see when you read this book of mine that I make a great difference between what I call the heliocosmos, solar system, the little cosmos centered around the sun, which is a massive thing, mass, power, like an autocrat of the solar system. Whereas when you are dealing with the galaxy, you are dealing with a companionship of radiant stars, not of dark planet where light is, but radiant energy, radiant beings which are center of light. And do you want to remain to the level of the dark planet, or do you want to ascend into the level and the realm of glowing and radiant light? Now, we cannot know too much about galactic consciousness. We cannot do too much with stars because we don't know enough about it. We are still at the threshold of it. We are at the point of massive planetary crisis. And the fact that we can think of the galaxy as a whole in which we are a part means that we have the opportunity to relate ourselves to the galaxy as a whole. And the point is for us to accept the crisis as an indication that the time has come for us to change. Now, do not worry about the technique. Do not worry about how to, that great American disease. If you accept totally, irrevocably, to be transformed, to focus the world crisis in your own person, to live up to the hill in an atmosphere of crisis and transformation, then if you do that, life will bring you the means, the challenge, the opportunity. And if you do that, everything will change. Because your relationship to all your life, to all the people around you, to all the events of your life will have completely changed. And if you do that, then keep steady and keep awake. And God be with you. Thank you.